everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Leah, and this is Kyle, and we're representing Group C, Think Outside the Barrel. And we'd love to tell you a little bit about what our group thinks we should do today. We think we should save up to 4.7 million lives per year. We think we should do it by 2025, and we think we should do it by stabilizing the global temperature to 2.1 degrees Celsius. We have a huge crisis on our hands right now. Air pollution, sea level rising, global warming, extreme weather patterns, threats to agricultural production, a number of things that are undermining our health, safety, and business interests on this planet in the coming years. We have a proposal today to do that and more. So our vision for climate change is that we can shift the global economy to mitigate climate change impacts by 2025 by increasing taxes on the fossil fuel industry and heavily subsidizing renewable energy sources and research and development. We also believe that we can implement a global tax on CO2 emissions and distribute the revenue across sectors to mitigate some of those impacts. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the justifications for those components. Our plan creates a series of Pigouvian taxes to correct negative externalities that are created by high-impact fossil fuels. We believe that one of the major contributors to climate change is that many people are not internalizing the impacts today of the fuel choices that they're using. We're using the cheapest and most efficient things and not thinking about how it impacts people in Bangladesh, how it impacts our grandchildren. So these set of taxes on coal, on oil, on gas, and on CO2 emissions in general attempt to make people accountable for those impacts. We also are trying to incentivize consumers and producers to shift towards renewable energy by offering competitive subsidies, the most competitive subsidies that we can offer, 8% to renewable energy sources and research and development in that field. Today, we negotiated compromises with a number of key stakeholders. I think Kyle and I standing up here today is a great metaphor for that. I came representing the energy efficiency industry and my stakeholders who care about cheap airline tickets, cheap gas, affordable public transportation, affordable housing. And Kyle is here with the climate hawks.
Go Hawks.
He used to work for Greenpeace, and now we can share a stage together and bring this exciting solution to all of you. We used quite a few levers that influenced this proposal. We set a carbon tax of 176 today, and we're going to get started with that in 2025. We worked with our population and consumption stakeholders, and they're quite pleased today that population growth will revert back to the 1990s rate and will continue to grow. Our GDP from this proposal is quite high, and the energy efficiency industry, which I represented, made some sacrifices today that we're very proud of because we are truly committed to stabilizing temperature to 2.1 degrees Celsius by the end of the century.
So I'm going to go over some of our long-term outcomes, first by starting with our major economic variables that Leah has introduced us to. One of them is we started out with a very robust GDP per capita growth rate of 3%. We thought this would fit for actually some of the exact obvious reasons that were presented earlier, that would bring these economies along. We think higher growth rates along with population increases. We were happy to see that our model, we got a 10 out of 10 on GDP, which means that the GDP by the end of our proposal would have been the same as at the beginning, which means that we would have internalized these costs and that the flux that our economy would have to go to make these adjustments to get to this 2-degree temperature, we'd be able to get back to normal. One of the main ways we got buy-in from all different stakeholders was our carbon price allocation. The fossil fuel industry really wanted to get on board by agreeing to increase taxes. And one way that we got them to do this was a fossil fuel industry allocation of 10%. Sustainable energy received a 65% because the role of sustainable energy in the future is undeniable of helping create a mixture of different sources. And also, mainly getting back to the public, can the public actually afford these? Is this going to be sustainable for them and their lives? We wanted to make sure that 25% went back. as far as subsidies and taxes. Beginning in 2015, we would abolish all subsidies for fossil fuel industries and established a taxation of scaling it from $8 with coal, $7 with oil, and $6 for natural gas. And then beginning in 2017, there will be an $8 subsidy on all renewables. This includes biomass, nuclear, and new technology. New technology was a big part of our proposal because I believe in the future there'll be new technologies that can help sort of make the gap between what we have now, because unfortunately we can't have just all renewable energy. We cannot get rid of oil, but it's about creating a mixture to go out into the future so we can continue this economic growth. Another point, this involved a lot of negotiating. We started at $60 for our emissions price, but negotiated up to $176 by 2025. The reason we picked 2025 is we wanted to give enough time to be able to implement this, to make sure all the regulations and structures were in order to make sure this was effective. And also a big part of ours was phasing out coal by 2080. This was really crucial, and this was also something that the fossil fuel industry recognized, that coal is decreasing despite there being recent growth in countries like China, India. China just recently committed to starting to reduce coal-fired power plants beginning in 2020. So how the policy package works. So I'd like to point out here that the red line is our model and the orange is the baseline. And we'd like to point out that our energy demand stays relatively level but increasing around 2090. And this is because that our population growth projections and the GDP per capita growth. One thing we're very proud of with our model as well is that the cost of energy is decreasing over time. As you can see, there's quite a bit of variability as all these different measures are being implemented. However, as compared to the baseline, which is the orange line on top, much lower energy prices for everyone. Another we're also very proud of is our energy share by source. And this is something that we reached a broad consensus on within our different sectors of how can we create, again, this right mixture. And for us, we put a lot of faith in future new technology. We've seen quite amazing innovation over the last couple years. And we have faith that by 2100 that we'd have some new technologies that will really help carry us forward. And then, you want to go to this? Or should me?
Oh, sure. I'd like to run you all through the immediate implementation steps for this plan. We had all 7 sectors make commitments to make sure that this plan is on a roll by 2025, when we really want energy savings and lower temperatures to take effect. So in 2016, this year, our world objective is to initiate the economic shift toward renewables. We had our carbon pricing group make some compromises today to commit to a high carbon price. Our climate hawks are very pleased with the outcome today, and they will be increasing their advocacy and making sure that we have a global consensus around climate change and around the world's response. And we have our various sectors working with their stakeholders to make sure that people are on board with their incentives and their commitments. A big part of our policy proposal is funding research and innovation so that we can become more efficient. We can do things more cheaply. We can do them in a way that's much better for the world. Just a couple minutes here. I want to just walk you through our SWOT analysis very quickly. We got very invested in the nuances of it, and it didn't make it into our slideshow. But I'm just talking a little bit about some of the strength of this plan is that it has a very high GDP, which means that economic growth, the economy can continue to flourish despite some of these constraints that some business interests were worried about. We have a high increase in funding for research and development, which is huge. We're very proud of that, and we have our fossil fuel industry funding a lot of those innovations. It's very exciting. We're going to have high revenue generated from those taxes that will feed into subsidies for the sustainable energy sector. We have collaboration on sustainability across 7 sectors today. Some of our weaknesses would be in our agriculture and land use group. We have that group reducing CO2 emissions by 80%. They were probably the least satisfied of our stakeholders today, but they're very committed to getting our temperature 2.1 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels by the end of the century. We acknowledge that our plan does have some political vulnerabilities. We're working across international borders, and it can be a little challenging to create some of that buy-in across countries. But we're very excited about the opportunities ahead, and we thank you for your time. Yes.
It seems like one of the underlying assumptions of your plan is that new technologies will come to fruition. What happens if they don't?
This is something we've talked about, and our kind of rationale behind this is that if new technologies don't, we would assume the technologies renewable would get better and become more efficient in that regard. So if we figured it was not quite interchangeable, but nonetheless that renewable would be a part of this and that would grow.
I think we have a lot of faith right now in the rate of innovation as well. If you think about stakeholders from 1916 trying to theorize where society would be in 1960 or even or today, who could have predicted, who could have been so optimistic and so hopeful about some of those innovations?
So coal energy power plants remain one of the quickest and cheapest power plants or energy sources to produce to establish as a developing country, which typically has large populations with very low, I suppose, average earning potential and high levels of poverty. And the GDP, and they're typically agricultural, which score quite low. How would you want to phase out coal altogether by 2080? What solution would you provide for those developing countries that need to supply energy and heat to the population?
A big mixture is, again, focusing on renewables and then also with new technologies. I think one of the economic boosts for these nations would be helping to get some of these new industries there and beginning to take off. Unfortunately, coal is just not something that can continue in the future, and I think we're beginning to see those effects now.
Going back to the gentleman's question on relying on new technologies, I believe in the model new technologies comes a little later than 2025. So because economic indicators tend to lag for leaders making political decisions, you mentioned being very cognizant of political vulnerabilities. What happens if come 2025, we haven't yet seen the results of the model because you haven't given it too much time to really keep your stakeholders committed to the plan that you set forth, given that you won't see the new technologies just yet? What promises or reassurances can we make that just give it a little more time, we're almost there?
That's a great question. I would love to toss that to someone from our carbon pricing, one of our colleagues in our carbon pricing unit, because they're sort of responsible for the world leaders and assuring those commitments. Any of our colleagues in the carbon pricing unit?
Yeah, can you restate it? Sorry, I was trying to track it, but.
It was along the lines of, given that your model kind of relies on new technologies, but your timeline is more focused towards 2025, indicators tend to lag. So come 2025, if we haven't yet seen the changes we want, what kind of promises or reassurances are we going to have to keep the stakeholders committed to the plan that they don't renege?
Okay, and that's a great question because we were considering that, and it's true. A large part is while we are like in that implementation plan, if we skip back to it, part of the goal is within population consumption, and when we're trying to adapt within the industries as well as the countries, it's trying to account for that within how we're allocating, like, you know, our research and development, and also in our contingency plan of, for example, Exxon, like these big oil producers, coal, like they're accounting for these carbon prices that haven't quite, you know, been obligated yet. And so it's the hope that we are going to have a lot of, I guess, what's that word I'm looking for, but like a lot of engagement with these industries to start kind of building that contingency fund, you know, to help, I guess, sail or float through that first decade or so. But the reality is technology, we don't have an option. Like, we need to increase technology. And so that was so huge to us because the question that was brought up just before that, I mean, we have to do this. We have to progress. Like, we can't stay the status quo.
On top of that, I mean, it's not like we're going to wait until 2025 to see what happens.
No.
There'll be a set of benchmarks along the way to see what the status is, where the industry is, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not like we're putting all our eggs in one basket and being like, oh my God, is it 2025? What's happening with this industry?
In your guys' model, what would you guys suggest that you would change in order to meet the 2-degree goal?
I think one of the main things was energy efficiency. They were one of the groups that made some of the most sacrifices, and unfortunately, they were not willing to go by 3.3%. That being said, I think that's something that can be worked on in the future, and I think if there was the ability to phase out a little bit more in the model and take that into account, but we just couldn't get past that one point, unfortunately.
I think we could have been a little bit more optimistic about our breakthrough years as well for some of these technologies. Any more questions?
So you seem to be really optimistic about the phasing out of coal, and you obviously had some very cooperative representatives in the room. Looking beyond the room and the coal industry, do you have any indications they're going to go along this plan?
I'm sure it'll be a fight and a challenge in a lot of ways. It is certainly not the path of least resistance to phase out coal. It'll make a lot of people unhappy, but I think we have a very urgent threat ahead of us, and we hope that the international community can rally around this shared goal, because we know that coal is a big contributor to this problem right now. And we know that it's a lot easier for developing countries to utilize coal. It's a lot cheaper. It's there. The technology's been around for a long time, but we need to push through and make sacrifices together.
Where does that play in your, I know you didn't share your implementation plan, does that have a role in your implementation plan?
Well, I think a large part in the research and development, or like when we were focusing, I know we talked about this earlier on, was the discussion of we can't just leave the fossil fuel groups, like including the coal, high and dry. Like we have to try to concentrate efforts and funding for them to be able to stay afloat. And so although coal is phasing out, we're hoping to integrate like their involvement with these new technologies so that they can find like a new source to be able to continue. But we weren't specific within that detail. So that was something we talked about, but we didn't give exact details of how that would happen.
Yeah, I think there's some exciting opportunities for them to innovate their industry as well. Well, thank you. I guess our time is up. We appreciate it. Addressing climate change does not have to be complicated and expensive. Thank you.